It is time again to get candid with the cardboard, where I share my first impressions of new to me board games. This episode, I'm going to be talking about the 6 following games: Sky Team, Quest for El Dorado, Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries, Match of the Century, Cat Ass Trophy, also known as Zero Down, Lacuna, and MLEM Space Agency. My name is Nick Murray, and you are listening to the Bitewing Games podcast. So we're going to start things off talking about Sky Team, which I have 3 plays of at 2 players. You know, 2023 is shaping up to be a pretty banging year for 2-player games. I noticed this when a bunch of new 2-player games started to pile up both on my shelf of shame and in my pre-order queue. Recently, we've been enjoying new releases including Sail, Lacuna, Match of the Century, and Sky Team. I've yet to dig into Undaunted Battle of Britain because we still need to carry on with last year's superb Undaunted Stalingrad. And I'm still hotly anticipating Patterns and General Orders World War II. None of this takes into account other 2023 releases that play at higher counts but are killer at 2 players, including My City Roll and Build, My Island, Our Own Trailblazers, and many others. Glancing through all of the 2023 games I've played so far, it does appear that 2-player games are the strongest genre by far. I expect there will be a lot of these titles among my top 15 of the year list. Compare this to last year and the leading genre was probably push your luck, maybe? Roughly half of my top games of 2022 had some form of push your luck. Sky Team is yet another 2-player release in this hotly contested realm. But rather than duke it out on the ground with the countless other dueling designs, it takes to the skies with a cooperative worker placement dice game. Here you and your partner act as captain and co-pilot, working together to safely land your airplane. You'll be adjusting your speed, angling your wings, raising your flaps, deploying your landing gears, communicating with air traffic control, applying your brakes, and much more. You'll each roll 4 dice to start the round, which remain hidden behind your screens. Turn by turn, you will alternate placing a die onto the shared control panel board to get the job done. There are plenty of ways you can lose, and only one way you can win. Your altitude track gradually decreases, a round-by-round timer ticking down until your altitude strikes 0. And you better be lined up with the airport runway when that happens. Some dice spaces are exclusive to one player. Other spaces are open to both, and 4 total spaces, 2 per player, are mandatory each round. Speed, the sum of your 2 dice, and tilt, the difference between your 2 dice. Communication is not allowed after the dice have been rolled for the round, yet there are plenty of opportunities for subtle cues thanks to the timing and values of your dice placements. Sky Team gives you just the right amount of considerations and priorities to juggle across its fast-paced play. Fast meaning a few minutes per round and 20 or 30 minutes per game. And if you're feeling cocky, then you can jump into the intermediate, advanced, and expert scenarios, ripe with new modules and challenges such as training an intern, managing your fuel, adapting to weather conditions, and more. We tried the beginner scenario and enjoyed it, but the game really sung once we cranked up the difficulty a notch and welcomed in the added tension. Through plays 1, 2, and 3, Sky Team has flown upward from good to great to excellent in my regard. The scenario book and box comes with plenty of new challenges and chits to explore, and if that's not enough, then there is even a QR code which directs you to yet more scenarios that recycle and recombine the various modules. Most impressive of all, it captures a hint of the stress and thrills of flying a commercial airplane via disciplined and coordinated efforts. Much like the execution of a seasoned pilot, Sky Team lands with grace and gusto on the tarmac of our table. I give an excellent prognosis to Sky Team. Next game we're going to talk about, Quest for El Dorado, Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries, which I have 2 plays of at 2 and 3 players. Quest for El Dorado is the gift that keeps on giving, particularly because we've now seen multiple expansions released that blast the variety and replayability of this game into the stratosphere. Unfortunately, the publication and distribution of this game has created another kind of quest, that of navigating the different versions and publishers with all kinds of incompatibility issues just to acquire everything you want. Currently, the safest way to acquire nearly all of the good stuff is by ordering the base game and expansions directly from publisher lautapalette.fi. Who knows when or if Ravensburger will get around to putting out the new expansions in North America. But once you complete the quest to acquire the quest for El Dorado and its expansions, you are in for a grand time. Just like its companions, Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries is a box that absolutely supplements the full experience in exciting and welcome new ways. But it's just not the strongest expansion of the bunch. From an overhead view, this expansion provides one major benefit across its 3 new modules, that of slowing down the leader. If your races to El Dorado have been spoiled by one player consistently racing far ahead and leaving everyone hopelessly in the dust, then Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries should offer a great counterbalance. Dragons introduces 4 chunky dragon meeples to the map, each slumbering in their own domains, or in other words, separate terrain tiles. Their colors match the 4 types of cards. Well, they kind of match. But anyway, a dragon lies slumbering on its tile until a player steps foot in its domain and disturbs the peace. And everyone knows that an awakened dragon is a grumpy dragon. From there, it can roam freely, even off of its own terrain tile, and honestly become the most nightmarish feature to ever be introduced to this game. Any player can discard a matching card to move the dragon 1 space, plus a 2nd space if it was moved onto a matching space. For example, if the green dragon is moved onto a green space, or the purple dragon is moved onto the mountains and caves, which technically match the purple dragon. Wherever a dragon resides, nobody can move into or out of the adjacent spaces. So dragons can either serve as a wide blockade that nobody can pass through, or they can freeze your explorer in place as it hides from the nearby monster. This forces the blocked or hiding player to waste a card moving the dragon away in order to get around or escape on their turn. Most of the time, dragons are merely a minor nuisance that temporarily slow you down or make you take long detours to get around them. But if you just so happen to be short on the card type of a nearby matching dragon, then they really hurt your chances of victory. The key is to plan ahead by purchasing matching cards before entering their domain, and then try to race past them as quickly as possible. The Dragons module seems like it will easily become the most polarizing addition for El Dorado fans. I can see some folks pledging to never include it again after one rough play of it. It's not likely, but things could get particularly brutal if one player were to be surrounded by multiple dragons. All that said, the Dragons module offers 2 major benefits to those who are interested. First, it slows down the leader, and second, it puts the useless cards in your hand to good use. This one is absolutely a game changer in how it ramps up the interaction. Quest for El Dorado was already deliciously interactive thanks to how you can block each other with your own figures at bottlenecks. But this module ramps this feature up to 11 and makes you consider which is more important, using a card to advance yourself or to slow down your opponents. Treasures is the second module in this expansion and introduces something that is perhaps even wackier than antagonistic dragons. Namely, it offers an alternate path to victory. Now, you don't necessarily need to make it to El Dorado first to win. Simply lift 4 of these valuable treasures and call it a day. The moment a player claims a 4th treasure from the board, they are considered for all intents and purposes as across the finish line. From there, you still finish out the current round to see if any other players claimed 4 treasures themselves or reached El Dorado, and then you proceed with the usual tiebreakers. But these treasures are not easy to pocket. No siree. Usually they require you to trash multiple cards of the same color or up to a certain color strength. In other words, they can each put a sizable dent in your deck. But even if you don't pick up 4 of them, they can definitely come in handy. You can discard a treasure to move 2 spaces for free. Once more, these treasures provide a massive boon to the players who are lagging behind in the race. If you have no chance of catching the leader, then you can simply pivot to tracking down and lifting 4 treasures. And if your opponents let you run wild and free with this strategy by ignoring all of the treasures along the path, then it becomes all the easier. That's exactly what happened in our first play of the expansion. I fell a bit behind after a run-in with a dragon. But while I was stuck, I did get the chance to build up my deck. Meanwhile, one of my opponents raced far ahead with a strategy of rushing the finish line as quickly as possible. But because he and my wife ignored all of the treasures along the way, I pivoted to this strategy and secured the victory when he was still at least 2 turns from El Dorado. In our second play with the treasures module, and this one was at 2 players, we both stuck to the standard strategy of racing for the finish line. But even then, I picked up a couple treasures along the way and put them to good use. For one thing, the cards I trashed to lift the treasures weren't great, so I ended up with a more efficient deck overall. For another thing, I spent both treasures to get a little boost across the map when I needed it. Treasures is an interesting module that feels a bit like a double-edged sword. On one hand, it stands tall and bright like a lighthouse of hope to any players that quickly find they have no chance of reaching El Dorado first. On the other hand, it has the potential to result in an anticlimactic finish if players let one opponent have free reign on all treasures. But here's a counterpoint for you. Isn't a runaway leader in the normal race just as anticlimactic? Shoot, and now I've just convinced myself that this module is actually more useful than I initially thought. Moving on, the final module in this expansion is of a mysterious sort. Mysterious in the sense that it plops down valley tiles along the path that are foggy and unknown until a player stops next to them. Once a player is touching a valley tile, then it is flipped face up for all to see. One of the hexes displays a little icon that then gets rotated next to the explorer to determine the orientation of the tile. And in the blink of an eye, a mystery is uncovered. Once again, this is another feature that serves to slow down the leader and introduce a bit of drama. The first player to reach a valley tile has no idea what it contains or how to prepare for it. Everyone else has the benefit of bracing themselves as they approach. Granted, this one doesn't usually slow down the leader much, if at all, unless they happen to trash too many cards that were helpful for that specific tile. But I find that the main benefit of this module is that it adds a bit of spice to the race and variety to the map possibilities. So, there you have it, Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries. After tossing all 3 modules into each of my last 2 plays of El Dorado, I certainly feel that this expansion was worth adding to my collection. The Dragons will probably be the least frequently used module of the bunch, but I enjoy how they mix up the feel of the game. Treasures and Mysteries are much more likely to see regular use. For those who are big fans of El Dorado, like myself, I can heartily recommend this expansion as a supplement to the fun, even if it is probably non-essential for most groups. Honestly, the thing that I'm most excited about is the cornucopia of opportunities that lie ahead now that I have 3 expansions crammed into the base game box. Already, I've enjoyed a mixing and sprinkling of all 3 expansions into an entirely new concoction of a race. Some cards from one expansion, some terrain tiles from another, and some tokens from a third. The possibilities truly feel endless. All you need is a careful eye for good map design and enough time to lay it out. Or you can simply venture into the huge variety of community-made maps found on Board Game Geek. Just be aware that some of them are truly diabolical, possibly untested, and even unintentionally sadistic. At any rate, for those who prefer to ease themselves into the deep end of El Dorado, I suggest you follow this course. First, get the base game, obviously. There is plenty to enjoy here. You don't need expansions to enjoy El Dorado. But once you're ready, then you can first pick up the Dangers and Muisca expansion. This is the strongest expansion in my opinion. Third, I recommend you opt for the Heroes and Hexes expansion, which introduces more push-your-luck drama. Fourth, you can get around to this one, the Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries expansion, which introduces more brutal interaction and catch-up mechanisms. But it is likely to be more polarizing, just keep that in mind. And then finally, the Golden Temples. Why is this one last? Well, because the new compatible version is not released yet. It's coming out next year, and it apparently introduces some changes from the previous version, so I will wait to try it before offering my verdict. Of course, if you know you're going to love El Dorado, then you might as well pick up all of these at once, because in that case you'll save on shipping from Europe. I give a good prognosis to Dragons, Treasures, and Mysteries. Moving on, we're going to talk about Match of the Century, which I have 2 plays of at 2 players. Now, according to trusted sources, the best match of the 20th century was actually Monica Seles versus Steffi Graf in the 1995 US Open Final, or it was Bjorn Borg versus John McEnroe in the 1980 Wimbledon Final. So I was a little confused when I found chess pieces rather than tennis pieces in this new board game that recreates the match of the century. But I guess I'll let it slide. Actually, there is something quite lovely about dumping out a bag of chess pieces onto the table and setting them up for a game that is not chess. There are only a couple kings and a handful of pawns, but that's more than enough to get you in the right mood. Match of the Century features card-driven lane battling, much like the most popular titles of this genre. Battle Line, also known as Schottentotten, Air, Land, and Sea, and Rift Force. For Match of the Century, these battles take place across 4 fields and over many quick rounds. These rounds represent chess matches in an ongoing tournament between chess legends Boris Spassky and Bobby Fischer. 2 players compete for advantage in a tug-of-war track where the winner of the round gets to advance their king closer to victory, or in the case of a tied round, both players advance their king. You earn advantage by winning a lane battle, or in other words, by playing a higher strength in that lane than your opponents. Each player has a unique deck of cards they draw from, and the cards feature different values at the top and bottom. You'll be forced to flip your hand upside down every round as you trade off playing as the black pieces or the white pieces, and every card features a weak pawn on one end and a special piece like a bishop, rook, queen, or knight on the other. One player commits a card to a certain lane, and the other must respond by placing a card of their own in that same lane. The higher valued card wins the advantage, and that winning player slides the marker toward their end of their track. But winning the entire game is a bit more complicated than that. For one thing, the loser of each lane gets to trigger the special effect on their losing card, and it's common to want that special effect more than the lane victory itself. The effects can either help yourself or undermine your opponent. Perhaps you'll strengthen your own mental endurance or weaken your opponent's. Mental endurance being a critical feature that determines how well equipped you are in future rounds with your hand size, your bonus pawns, and your starting advantage. A played card can be made even stronger by adding up to 2 pawns to that lane, increasing your strength by 1 per pawn. So plopping a strong card down with a couple pawns gives you very good odds of winning that battle. But then you leave the door wide open for your opponent to play a high value card with a strong special effect. The thing I admire most about Match of the Century is how much it evokes the feelings and themes of chess. Chess, like many abstract games, forces you to put yourself out there, stick your neck out by advancing valuable pieces away from their safe haven and into hostile territory. Sometimes you have to sacrifice one piece to gain the upper hand on another piece. Match of the Century mimics this sensation by providing a counterblow to every blow. Sometimes you'll fall 1 step back so you can advance 2 steps forward later. Other times you'll triumphantly march 1 step forward, only to quickly find yourself sliding 2 steps back. The first time I played Match of the Century, I found it intriguing but not immediately engrossing. It wasn't until our second play, several days later, when we swapped roles and dug into the game further, that it finally clicked for me. Between the various tracks, many card effects, and constantly flipping hand, Match of the Century can be a rather dizzying experience at first. But once I felt more comfortable with the systems, that's when the satisfying maneuvers opened up to me. Then I found clever ways to utilize my current hand and position to trap my opponent and seize the round victory. I figured out when to discard cards from my hand between rounds. This is an option that initially seemed strategically impenetrable. And on those rounds when I felt like I had an especially weak hand, I still found ways to undermine my opponent to gain the long-term advantage. So after these 2 plays, I'm hungrier than ever to revisit Match of the Century. The only problem is that my main player 2, my wife, does not enjoy this game at all. Where some tug-of-war games like Royal Visit hit the spot for her, perhaps because they are more streamlined, direct, and clear, Match of the Century is probably the most opaque of the bunch. It takes a fair bit of digging and determination to find the satisfaction in this competition. And much like chess, you have to be okay with making painful sacrifices now for larger victories later. I give a good prognosis to Match of the Century. Next game on the list, we're going to talk about Catastrophe, also known as Zero Down. I have 1 play of this at 4 players. So as an ultra-casual rummy card game, Catastrophe is fine. It's perfectly fine. But as a Knizia design card game, it's aggressively mediocre. My first hint at this was the fact that across our 4 entire hands, I couldn't manage to conjure a single rummy set of 5. Much of this was simply due to the fact that other players were dealt better starting hands than me. The other reason is that whatever rummy path I ventured down, I never saw a fifth or often even a fourth card of that type that I could claim from the market. When 4 entirely different hands turn out to be duds, that's when you start to wonder if it's an underlying design issue rather than a one-off fluke. The object of the game is to collect sets of 5 cards of the same number or the same color. A set of 5 cards is worth 0 points, and points are bad in this game. Where players maintain a hand of 9 cards throughout the game, it's possible to get a perfect hand by having 5 of a color and 5 of a number, where 1 card is shared among both sets. We had 1 player reach this lofty goal, and because they did it in 1 round, they crushed our total scores even after 4 rounds. Now, I would have been happy to just get a single measly set of 5 cards just one time, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. Instead, I had to just try to accumulate multiple cards with matching values, because at least you only score each value once, much like Knizia's Llama card game. Or when I felt like my hand was decent early in a round, and there was no prospect for me in the public display, I had to rush the end of the round by passing. After the pass action is chosen by anybody for the second total time in a round, then everyone else gets 1 more turn and you're stuck with whatever is in your hand. That's a nifty little feature that adds a hair of tension to the game. After the first pass, everyone is on edge, hoping they get more turns to take the regular swap action, meaning swap 1 card from your hand with 1 from the display. And although I appeared to have the worst luck of the group due to my failure to create any rummy sets, that's not the primary reason I call this Knizia card game aggressively mediocre. I'm perfectly fine with heavy doses of luck in a simple, fast, and small game. The problem here is that our play of Catastrophe was as lively and entertaining as a funeral home. You could see it on the expressions of the players, even the ones who were winning. You could hear it in the noise at the table, or rather, the lack thereof. Heck, even Whale Riders, the card game, which isn't Knizia's strongest card game either, not even close, managed to bring way more drama and energy to our same group that same night. Add to all this the fact that half the art features cats showing off their anuses, all for a cheap gag, and I'm finding far more reasons to avoid this one rather than revisit it. I gave a poor prognosis to Catastrophe, also known as Zero Down. Next game we're going to talk about Lacuna, which I have 3 plays of at 2 players. If there is one thing that publisher CMYK deserves praise for, it is their thoughtful, planned productions that enhance the game experience. Whether it's the ability to set up wavelength and pass around the box with no table required, or the charming Dalmatians and dice in spots, or the ease of setting up the fuzzies, or in this case the sprinkling tube of Lacuna, as well as the metal pawns, colorful flowers, and wide-spanning cloth board. Without any context, the components here beg to be handled and played with, but one doesn't need much context to get into Lacuna. The game is as smooth and as simple as it gets. On your turn, position one of your pawns between 2 matching flowers anywhere along the unbroken, invisible line that connects them. Then claim both of those flowers. Take turns doing this until all pawns are out. Then claim all of the remaining flowers on the board that are closest to your pawns. The player who claims the most majorities of these 7 flower types wins. The more you play, the more you uncover clever decisions. Which colors to gun for, where exactly to position your pawn between them, how to box your opponent out of endgame flowers on the board. It's a delight to uncover these strategies. The one decision I haven't quite cracked yet is which flower to claim during setup if you are the starting player. Currently, this first player advantage still feels like weak recompense for the massive turn order advantage that the second player has for getting to place the last pawn of the game. Perhaps I'm just not crafty enough to know what to do with that starting flower token. But the game is quick enough, and there is no harm in playing 2 rounds and alternating the start player. The simplicity and speed of Lacuna, combined with a unique abstract challenge and a perfect production, make this one of the most fresh 2-player games in years. Lacuna has a breezy timelessness to it that many 2-player titles can only dream of providing. It's not the most tense or riveting game among my collection of duelers, but it doesn't want or need to be. I gave a good prognosis to Lacuna. Finally, we're going to wrap up this episode talking about MLEM Space Agency, which I have 4 plays of, all at 4 players, and of note, a review copy of this game was provided to me by the publisher. Welcome to the future. Cats now rule the world, and so they've set their eyes on space, the final frontier. You and your team of catastronauts are catapulting yourself far into the cosmos via a series of rocket ship launches. The goal is to travel deep into the galaxy beyond. But if you can't get that far, then at least land yourself on Planet Yarn, or Planet Goldfish, or a moon, or something. They all seem like quite lovely places for a domineering cat like yourself to inhabit. Here, players take turns being the Cat Commander, or Catmander for short, not to be confused with Charmander. The Catmander pilots the rocket ship, and all other players jump aboard with a catstronaut of their own. The fearless feline leader then collects up these 6 dice and begins the flight. With every roll, the Catnipton separates the dice results into groups of matching values. The 2s here, the 4s here, the afterburners here, and so on. The only groups of dice that you can use for this roll are entirely dictated by the current position of the rocket ship. All the rocket spaces spread out across the long neoprene mat like a wavy trail of pearls and possibilities. If your rocket ship is on a space that shows 1s, 3s, and afterburners, then those are the only dice that you can use to advance forward. Much like Knizia's legendary Picamino, if you pick the 3s, then you must set aside all 3s and can no longer use those dice for the rest of the round. But there is a bit more nuance to the dice restrictions here that can help you reach far into outer space. You are allowed to select multiple valid groups to propel your rocket ship forward, adding the sum of all of these dice to move that many spaces. This freedom allows you the wiggle room to determine with more precision the next space your rocket ship lands on. Plus, afterburners are almost always great to use because those dice stay with you for the next roll. The ability to pick 1 or more valid groups of dice to move forward allows the pilot puss much flexibility in where the rocket ship stops after each roll, and either play the long game, try to conserve dice and travel far, or the short game and try to hit a closer target and then bail. You may want the rocket ship to land on a certain space because it gets you to your desired destination, or you may want it to land on a certain space because the probability of not exploding or traveling faster on the next roll are higher. After each roll of dice and movement of the ship, every player, starting with the head whiskers, can decide whether to bail on the nearby planet or moon or stay on the rocket for another roll of the remaining available dice. If you do happen to peace out at a rocket space, it's always beneficial to be the first kitten to abandon the caboodle because wherever you end up will typically grant you more points than later Meowards who follow you. Planets are area majority battles for points, with ties going in favor of the first to arrive, while each moon only has 1 space for each castronaut, granting immediate points, and then the following moons at the same space grant diminishing points. These points ever tempt you to abandon ship, because the risk of a cosmic catastrophe is very real. The moment that the leader does not roll a single valid die for the space that the rocket ship is at, is the moment that ship erupts into a burning ball of flames and fur. Fortunately, these catastronauts have 9 lives, so your dead kitties always come back to you to be used on a future launch. So the challenge of MLEM Space Agency is in bailing out at the perfect moment to gain maximum points and then hoping that those you've left behind meet a quick demise. It's a game of collectively crossing your fingers on a shared incentives rocket, cheering on your captain, and then protracting your claws and beelining it for the nearest floating rock when things get a little dicey, or in this case, less dicey. The incremental increases of points as you travel further from Earth may not seem like a compelling enough reason to keep pushing your luck further, but that is only the case if you aren't also considering the competitive objectives and the catstronaut abilities. Like many other misunderstood Knizia games, the brilliance is hidden in the unfolding subtleties. Those who don't discover those deeper layers may hastily judge this game to be lacking in meaningful or satisfying decisions. In a game where the player's score will be in the range of 30 or 40 points, every point matters, and the competitive objectives each grant 5 points to the player who claims them. That is certainly not something you should ignore if you are hoping to win. These achievements are claimed by putting out your cats onto 4 different planets or moons, or by having 3 kitties on 1 planet, or by getting 2 catstronauts to the end of the track first. Now, this last one hasn't been achieved yet, but we have gotten very, very close. On that note, I've heard some folks claim that outer space is basically impossible to reach. But to offer another take, we have managed to reach outer space once per play in our first 3 plays, but not in our 4th. And I nearly reached it a second time in the same game, and that thrilling near miss actually cost me the victory. Competing over objectives is only half the battle. The other half happens before the rocket ship even takes off, as each player decides which ability to contribute to the ship. All 8 of these powers are a joy to utilize. With both hope and fear in your heart, you'll strap another kitten to the next rocket ship as it prepares for launch. And often, your decision will be influenced by what the other players contribute before you. One ability allows the rocket ship to launch from the satellite rather than from Earth, giving the group an immediate head start. Another ability contributes a one-time use die that can bail you out of an otherwise disastrous situation. If somebody puts out one of these cats, then you might be more tempted to throw down a point multiplier cat, one which doubles your points if it lands on the right type of destination, specifically a planet or a moon or outer space. But as soon as somebody aspires to double their points, the next person might be tempted to add their sabotage cat to the ship. This cat takes a die with them when they bail off the ship. Finally, the parachute kitty lets you still bail from a ship after it has crashed, and another cat lets you bail above or below your current rocket space. I can't stress enough how brilliant and impactful these abilities are. For one thing, they evoke a playful social banter during the launch phase, as you try to convince your friends to aid your filling ship and then watch as they make the altruistic decision, the selfish decision, or the evil decision. Then, as your ship takes flight, you'll watch each other squirm in discomfort at the consistently difficult decision of when to bail. The parachute cat will encourage players to stay aboard to the bitter end, while the double points cats will tempt players to either bail early or push to the next lucrative level that is nearly within reach. Each turn keeps all players involved, yet feels distinctly different from the last, thanks to the mix of cats on board and the unpredictability of the dice. And unlike basically every other push your luck game in existence, here you can have the worst luck ever on your own turns, yet still be competitive in the game. That's exactly what happened to me during our first 2 plays. I couldn't roll a good dice result to save my life, and whenever I was commander, our rocket would basically instantly explode near the lowest planet and moons. My poor luck became the running joke of both plays, to all of our amusement, but I still came out winning both games because I made great decisions during other players' turns. We enjoyed all the drama of a push your luck game, yet it didn't come at the expense of one player's miserable misfortunes. In other words, with MLEM, you can have your cake and eat it too. Now, the base game provides plenty of variety to explore that I would happily play over and over again. Yet it doesn't stop there. Publisher Rebel Studio went as far as cramming 3 additional modules into the game, which also brings some neat variety and spice. One of them is basically a private objectives module where players are incentivized to land on specific planets and moons. Another sprinkles juicy bonuses along the rocket track, which can either grant the commander bonus points, an extra die, or a rocket boost forward if the ship lands on that space exactly. The final one is the wackiest of all, with a UFO ship that gradually descends from the top of the rocket track, sometimes restricts your starting dice, yet makes up for that restriction with powerful one-time use abilities. And if the rocket stops precisely on the UFO's current space, then that ship commander gets major bonus points. All 3 of these modules introduce more considerations to chew on, yet they also give way for luck to have a bigger impact on the final scores. Sometimes the commander gets the perfect roll that lands them on a point-scoring exploration token or UFO. Unlike the standard planet or moon scoring, there isn't much that opponents can do to keep up with such luck other than hope they likewise get lucky on their turns, or stay more competitive across the planets and objectives. Plus, some UFO tiles simply take away 1 or 2 of the commander's dice right at the start of the round. But as I said, this is compensated with a free reroll or a one-time use bonus. After 4 plays with various combinations of modules, I find myself leaning towards the vanilla experience, perhaps with the exploration tokens thrown in, mostly because it makes for a tighter experience that focuses on the best parts of MLEM. But I can see how some folks might have strong preferences for using or excluding certain modules. Now, if you can't tell, I'm already a big fan of MLEM Space Agency. As somebody who has played far too many Knizia dice games, this one easily lands in my top 3. Even in the broader sphere of push your luck titles, MLEM soars far above so many others by being spicy yet not overly punishing, interactive yet not needlessly brutal, chaotic and hilarious yet clever and strategic. This game was available at Essen Spiel, but many will likely have to wait until the game releases more broadly in early 2024. Speaking for myself, MLEM has launched high up the rankings as one of my favorite releases this year. I give an excellent prognosis to MLEM Space Agency. And that's going to do it for today's episode. But before you go, I know many of you are participants in the great holiday of Thanksgiving and the chaotic aftermath of Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So I did want to mention that Bitewing Games and our partner publisher Allplay are currently running a Black Friday sale. Specifically, a stocking stuffer sale with tons of small box games that are each 15% off. That is $16 a game or less. This includes all of our small titles: Soda Smugglers, Puma Mafiosi, Hot Lead, Gussie Gorillas, and Trailblazers Pocket Edition, as well as tons of Allplay titles, both old and new. So be sure to check out the link in the description of this podcast where you can see that current sale. It will run until Tuesday, November 28th. And don't forget that, as always, for most regions, we do flat rate shipping, and it is a lot cheaper than most sites. We're talking $4 shipping within the continental US and $9 shipping in Canada and the EU. So happy Thanksgiving to all of you who celebrate. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Nick Murray, and you've been listening to the Bitewing Games podcast.